Akira Kurosawa's Throne of Blood is a masterclass in cinematic art, with all the key aspects of mise-en-scène, cinematography, editing, sound and performance equally of note and fully harmonised. Its innovative spark was in adapting Shakespeare's Macbeth to a distinctly Japanese aesthetic, a canny bit of cultural hybridity as its narrative arc and central tragic figure are familiar to both Jacobean and Noh Theatre. Macbeth's soul is in a liminal state of flux, haunted by spirits while drawn to earthly ambition, caught between the physical and the spiritual, reality and nightmare, fearful yet defiant of divine retribution. The character archetype is consumed and ruined by ambition and forces beyond their understanding. Their suffering arises from being trapped between desire and detachment. This transfers seamlessly to a Buddhist worldview of implacable karma and enlightenment. More prosaically, in his study on Kurosawa in Context, Mitsuhiro Yoshimoto addresses some of the debates around the cultural crossover and Western influence on Japanese life in the post-war period. If we leave aside discussions as to whether this crossover could be better described as cultural imperialism in a period of post-war national vulnerability, then we can perhaps concur that Throne of Blood was at least timely in borrowing the cultural capital of a canonical Western text at a point when Japanese cinema was making an impact at international film festivals, largely thanks to Kurosawa. An international success, yes, but Robert N. Watson states that Western acclaim was initially matched by a tepid domestic response. The director had intended to begin production on Throne of Blood soon after the Japanese ban on Shakespeare was lifted after the war, but the release of the Orson Welles adaptation in 1948 put Kurosawa's plan on hold for nearly a decade. In the meantime, he produced Rashomon, Ikiru and Seven Samurai, so it was hardly time wasted. From André Bazin onwards, film critics have typically identified that the main element we would associate with Shakespeare is almost wholly absent in the film: the words. Counterintuitively, the spoken dialogue in Throne of Blood is minimal, blunt and functional. Certainly, the English subtitles suggest none of Shakespeare's poetry, though a native speaker of Japanese may disagree. Instead, to quote yet another critic, Anthony Davies states that Kurosawa's films find a spatial articulation which almost dispenses with the need for dialogue, while Mitsuhiro Yoshimoto notes the influence of Japanese ink paintings in several shot compositions. Even more evident is the impact of Noh Theatre's stylized movement on the use of mise-en-scène, soundtrack and particularly on performance, with often precisely controlled minimalism and stylization in movement, voice and actor blocking. Noh uses character masks, to which the film's makeup design alludes, through the mask-like qualities of the characters of the spirit and Asagi in particular. Moreover, Kurosawa doesn't simply borrow these surface elements to imitate the theatrical form in front of the camera. He reshapes the entire atmosphere of the film using Noh aesthetics to inform its tragic, fatalistic tone through camera work and editing. The cliché about Kurosawa is to suggest that every frame is a painting, a cliché with some justification, whether an ink scroll or not. See the shot of the two warriors whose friendship is straining under the tantalizing and fatal promise of power, all conveyed in the shot of them sitting either side of the frame. They are already divided. Kurosawa films are renowned for their use of weather as pathetic fallacy. Typically, it is boring. Throne of Blood opens with dense fog that hangs around for a lot of the first act, often combined with an incongruous wind that blows both it and Washizu, the Macbeth figure, around, a physical manifestation of his hesitation and loss of control, and a menacing extension of the supernatural elements manipulating events. We also hear a burst of flutes and percussion over a chorus of male voices, immediately establishing a diegetic location of feudal otherness over that impossible combination of fog and wind drifting over a bleak landscape. Throughout, the weather punctuates the emotional or narrative turning points. The fog-drenched cobweb forest is a transitional space between reality and hallucination, between battlefield and castle, life and death, heroism and villainy. It is appropriate that Washizu and his ally Miki, his Banquo, are lost and confused in the sequences that bookend their encounter with the spirit here. The weather is both atmospheric and symbolic, with an ominous sentience that mirrors Washizu's moral confusion, seeming to manipulate the rhythm of the editing. Shots drift in and out of clarity as fog overtakes the entire frame, leaving the following image to emerge from the gloom. This serves as something we might call semi-diegetic dissolves, indicating both cinematically conventional passing of time and an indication of Washizu's indeterminate perception of reality and phantasm. The location shooting on the slopes of Mount Fuji with its black volcanic soil adds to the general sense of the supernatural. For the studio shot interiors, Washizu's castle is minimal, empty, highlighting his isolation in power, with low angles of rooms and corridors shot to isolate him. Those long corridors with bare walls evoke a dreamlike space rather than a specific historical setting. Characters are often overwhelmed by looming architectural elements, castle walls, gates, those corridors again, emphasising the oppressive weight of fate and power. Standing in front of the sliding doors of his seat of power, Washizu is unnerved. Either side of him, in notable sunshine, the lives of the peasant class go blithely on. The shot itself is both interior and exterior, natural and stylized. The character's internal liminality embodied in his performance and spatial disorientation. He paces empty rooms, speaks to absent people, he looks off-screen into the void, suspended between agency and resignation. Between imposing castle and wild forest, a binary opposite of man and nature is established. Washizu's hubris is in crossing these boundaries of liminality, in shifting Shakespeare's setting for the two supernatural encounters from a heath to the forest. Kurosawa gains a dramatic reversal when the forest at last comes to him. That the castle is largely constructed of wood, presumably from that forest, is both historically accurate and dramatically apt. Without the device of Macbeth's soliloquies to convey the character's inner turmoil, Toshiro Mifune as Washizu largely conveys a conflicted, damned soul through physical and facial expression, usually in contrast to the stillness around him, heightening his psychological isolation. Stylized, abrupt gestures and rigid stance recall the choreography of Noh. He becomes increasingly erratic. Frantic body language and darting eyes project paranoia. A Sight and Sound review from 1965 notes how Macbeth's famous "tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow" speech is replaced with Kurosawa holding the shot of the actor saying merely "fool." His slumped posture and the presence of his sword do the work. By contrast, the minor characters exude no evident inner life, adopting formalized, restrained movement reminiscent of a feudal Japan where everyone is bound by ritual and duty. This makes Washizu's violent unravelling stand out, and why, ultimately, their turning on him, to him, is a shock. As Asaji, the Lady Macbeth figure, Isizu Yamada sits almost motionless. Her highly stylized makeup and minimal expression unambiguously resemble a Noh mask. At first, she does not directly look at her husband, but when she tilts her head to return his gaze, her face seems locked in an uncanny, chillingly bland smile. When she does move, it is with purpose and determination, loaded with gestural symbolism. This makes her manipulative power feel relentless and natural, a malign force urging her husband towards his fate, her calm delivery resolute. As Washizu becomes increasingly frantic, her contrasting, eerie calm becomes more pronounced. She prepares the murder in silence, moving with precision, drawing on the symbolic choreography of Noh actors preparing a scene of spiritual importance. When we come to the famous hand-washing scene, Asaji at last begins to unravel. In a move away from the Shakespeare play, Kurosawa motivates this with a miscarriage. All the couple's sins had been committed to benefit this now unrealised heir. Her composure finally cracks, but subtly, through a slight twitch and a stifled breath. Her eyes betray recognisable human emotion for the first time. The hand-washing embodies the Noh motif of being stuck in ritual or obsession, and is in formal opposition to the panic screaming of her husband that is to come. Robert N. Watson throws some doubt on this, suggesting that her claim of pregnancy and miscarriage may be a fraudulent manipulation, possibly, though that interpretation robs the scene of the drama of her grief, physical and emotional strain, and for awareness of the futility of sins committed. Besides, the oppositions that the film has established between life and death, human agency and nature, ambition and duty, spirit and material, are more dramatically rendered if her downfall is due to a vengeful nature rather than a loss of nerve. Of the other two main characters, the forest spirit is almost completely static, like Asaji speaking and moving slowly, rhythmically, a ritualized performance that connects the two as inimicable, tempting influences. As both are dressed and made up in white, they seem to embody the same malignant fate. An initial contrast, Minoru Chiaki as Miki is much less stylized, evidently more earthy, and an emotional contrast to Washizu. This changes with his murder, when his ghostly appearance and stillness newly align him with a terrifying spirit world. The musical score by Masaru Sato draws heavily from Noh and Gagaku music, Japan's classical court and theatrical traditions, characterized by drums, bamboo, shakuhachi flutes, and plucked string instruments. The soundtrack employs short, repetitive musical phrases that are ritualistic and ominous. What should be natural sounds, such as wind or rustling leaves, are often high in the audio mix, wholly appropriate for a story in which the forest is a place where spirits lurk, and is itself prophesied to move at the narrative climax. The cinematography adapts to no ritualism through often frontal composition, long takes and both carefully composed static shots and fluid formalistic camera movement. Wide shots linger over shifting fog patterns, making the landscape seem conscious, with the figures often small in the composition, with forest or castle more imposing. Symmetrical framing highlights Washizu's entrapment both within his social system and inevitability. He becomes increasingly isolated in shot. Deep focus suggests that his world, like his fate, is closing in. Purposeful, almost ritualistic tracking shots or pans are extensions of points of realization, such as the sequence where he becomes aware of the ghost at the banquet. Regarding editing, Kurosawa at times avoids the convention of shot-reverse shot in dialogue scenes, notably those between Washizu and Asaji that employ static two-shots or flowing tracking shots with minimal cuts. In this way, the combination of camera and editing become extensions of the glacial, controlled Asaji herself, emphasizing her implacable dominance and pressurizing of Washizu. In the early sequence where we are introduced to our two warriors, rain and thunder sound as they search their way through the forest. These men have just won a great victory, but are now lost to the elements of Shakespeare's foul and fair day. Amplified sounds of the men's cries, galloping hooves and thunder, are underscored with eerie, inhuman cries. A flash of lightning disguises the cut from location to studio setting, but the shift in tone from loud to unnaturally quiet, and the uncanny lighting on the spirit's shelter and change in ambience suggests a line between reality and the supernatural has been crossed. Kurosawa maintains the spirit in the light while the men hide in the shadows. The spirit's quiet singing is cracked, dry, uncanny. Long shot duration cuts at moments of realization. The spirit's spinning thread is a clear metaphor for the entrapment appropriate for Cobweb Forest and matches the performer's measured, ritualistic intonation. The lighting is high contrast, unnatural. The prophecy is punctuated by a sparse, dissonant score. Cutaway shots to Washizu and Miki show them more mobile and uncertain, contrasting with the spirit's stillness. This will be visually echoed by the later scenes with Asaji. As the spirit vanishes, the fog reclaims the frame. Kurosawa slowly reintroduces natural sounds to signal a return to something like reality. The dolly forward follows the men before dollying back to mirror their realization that the shelter they have just walked through has vanished, the fog creeping in around their feet. The camera mimics their gaze as they spy piles of skeletons. In contrast, for the death by arrow sequence, the camera is much more kinetic, closely scrutinizing Washizu's face, staying with him in his high panic and capturing his desperation in medium shots. Given that the scene was shot with archers firing real arrows in his direction, there was perhaps more than just acting going on here. The invasion of birds and the encroaching forest are again apposite, as Washizu's downfall comes in the form of flying wood and feathers. They come so thick and fast that he becomes a man lost again among thick branches, further suggested by the spatial geometry of the wooden stairs, beams and walls, made angular by the shot composition. Having begun in stillness, now panning and crabbing camera motion with a rhythmic quickening of cuts mirrors Washizu's rising panic, with only 2 cutaway shots of the archers. He is wholly alone, desperate. At the climax we have dropped performative ritual and are left with alarm. The final arrow through the neck lands with a devastating finality, returning the film to a deadening silence. As Washizu collapses, we hear his final gasp, then emptiness. His liminal world of supernatural dread, fate and ritual ends with him. The venerable film critic David Thompson is equivocal about Throne of Blood, praising how Mifune as Washizu roars and snarls to perfection, but suggests that Asaji's appearance and performance looks good, but actually fails to suggest the nagging sexual force that urges her husband on. He concludes she is not a virus in his soul. To an extent this is fair. Throne of Blood is more concerned with visual stylization, stillness and composition than character depth, but humanizing Asaji would be contrary to the film's aesthetic triumph. Throne of Blood's visual design doesn't support or decorate the text by Shakespeare. It removes the words of Shakespeare entirely, and yet loses nothing from the text.